British 627, no navigation to Seaford.
No navigation to Seaford, British 627.
Condor 118, special Condor 18, A through direct comms.
London, hello, good afternoon, Jersey 3006 with you. Direct to begin at 290 knots.
Jersey 006, will you continue your present heading, report the heading.
Roger, then we are 312.
Roger.
Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are finally back in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and we are of course going to be taking a look at the iniBuilds A350. I realise that this video is well overdue. No doubt many of you have already seen a multitude of A350 videos and reviews. However, as per my community poll, this was the next aircraft that you guys wanted to see reviewed here on the channel. And as well, the A350 is yet another member of the Airbus family, which I do have some real world experience with. So hopefully this video will give you a fresh perspective on the aircraft. Hopefully as well you'll pick up a few hints and tips along the way. And of course, ultimately looking to give you a detailed, accurate and honest review here of the product. As usual, we are going to be carrying out a full flight here today for the purposes of reviewing the aircraft. And for our flight today, we're actually going to be carrying out a delivery flight. Our aircraft is currently on the ground here in Toulouse, and we're going to be ferrying it back towards London Heathrow. In terms of the plan for our flight today, we are going to be carrying out a full cold and dark start. We'll be taking the jet up to flight level 400 for the cruise. We've got a flight time of around 1 hour and 30 minutes. En route, we'll be taking a look at some of the product's features and details. As well, we're going to be carrying out some aerial manoeuvring out over the English Channel. That will allow us to get more of a feel for the aircraft handling, as well take a look at some of the flight control laws and protections, before bringing the aircraft home for landing on London Heathrow's runway 09 left. As usual, at the end of the video, I'll give you a full breakdown on what I think of the add-on. And once more, given that I do have some real-world time with the A350, we will, of course, at the end of the video, contrast and compare the add-on here with the real-world jet. As always, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you would like to help support the content further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. So today then we find ourselves in the cockpit of the iniBuilds A350. More specifically, of course, we're taking a look at the A350-1000 here today. Of course, I am rather behind the curve here in terms of reviewing the aircraft, but it was, as per a community poll, the add-on that you most wanted to see here reviewed next on the channel. We're currently on the southwesterly apron here in Toulouse. We've just come off the production line, and again we're going to be ferrying our brand new jet back home towards London Heathrow. With that in mind then, we've just boarded the aircraft. So at the moment we'll just run through the preliminary cockpit preparations. So as you can see, we've got the battery selected on, and ground power there supplying the jet electrically. We'll try and run through the setup in a reasonably realistic fashion, although of course there will be certain concessions here made for the sake of the video. So firstly, starting down at the OIS, we'll come onto the flight op status page. You can see we are an A350-1000. Call sign for the flight today is Speedbird 350 Kilo, and again we're taking the aircraft from Toulouse back towards London Heathrow. In terms of maintenance, there is basic maintenance functionality included with the aircraft, and as you can see here we have a good jet. You'd certainly hope so given that we are a brand new airframe. In terms of our load sheets, obviously again this is intended to be a ferry flight here today, but I've just loaded the aircraft up to give us a more representative feel in terms of the aircraft handling and performance. So currently we have a zero fuel weight of 219.4 tons and 23.7 tons of fuel on board the jet. We've already run the takeoff performance numbers. That gives us a takeoff weight of 242.5 tons. So we've got Toulouse, runway 32 left, the wind 050 at 6 degrees, straight across the runway. 11 degrees on the temperature, 1015 for the QNH. Ride conditions, anti-ice off, takeoff weight again 242.5 tons. There'll be a config 1+F departure, air conditioning on, and a flex setting for the thrusts. So 32 left, that gives us a V1 153, VR of 156, V2 of 161. Flex temperature of 58 degrees, it'll be a config 1+F departure. THS setting later on will be 32%, and engine out acceleration is 1988. We'll keep those figures in mind later on for the setup. For now then, working our way through to the overhead panel, As usual, we'll start bottom left, work our way through to the top right. So for the cockpit oxygen supply, that can go on. CVR ground control can go on. The ADIRs, we'll set those through to nav. The lighting, strobes in auto, beacons off, nav lights on system 1, logo in auto there as well. For the belts, we've already got the jet fueled up, so we'll come through to on. Interestingly, the switches seem to be in what I would deem to be the incorrect sense. So for example, rolling my mouse wheel down here actually sets the switch up. I find that a little bit strange. No smoking signs and no mobile signs will set through to auto. Emergency exit lights will set through to armed. Air panel looks good, same for the electrical panel. Fuel pumps will take on left to right. We'll carry out the fire test. So good indications there for the engine and APU fire push buttons, same as well for the agent discharge buttons. Good indication for the main landing gear bay fire indicator. And good indications there as well on the engine master, same as well on the ECAM. For the rest of the overhead panel setup, that looks good. Coming down to the forward main instrument panel, switching looks good. We've got 1015 there on the standby altimeter. Gear handles down, anti-skid switch is selected on. For the radios on my side, we'll take VHF 1, and we'll just crank up the volume. Same as well for VHF 2, and as well for the interphone. We're not going to be using the radios here today, but we might as well set them up in a representative fashion. So we'll take 121.5 here on COM 2. Overall, the radio logic seems to be pretty nice. Speed brake handle is stowed, park brake is set and checked. Thrust levers are in the idle position, engine masters are off, engine start selector in the normal position. For the ECAM, we'll come onto the hydraulics page. Quantities look good for the engines. It's coming up to the overhead panel. We'll power up the FADEX. So just waiting for those to power up. If I was being very picky, I think it takes perhaps just a touch too long. And here we're just looking for the all quantities. And showing 20 quarts there on each side, so plenty of oil to get us home. We'll power off the FADEX once again. Lastly, the rain repellent is normal. Cockpit oxygen supply looks good. The weather radar and the transponder, we'll leave those on my side, system 1. Cockpit door open at the moment, we can leave that open for the time being. On the first officer side, we'll take VHF 1 and 2, and same as well here, we'll take the interphone. Flaps are retracted. Again, a little bit out of sequence, but for the EFIS selections, we've got 1015 on both primary altimeters. We'll take constraints and the VORs here on both sides. Take the flight directors on, and we'll set 7000 or flight level 70. That's going to be the stop height here for the departure. With all of that done, we'll now come down to the MFD, and we can begin setting that up for the flight. So we are an A350-1000, Trent XWB 97 engines installed on the aircraft. Idle and performance factors both 0 as per the flight plan. No fuel penalty for us. For the active database, 23rd of March to the 19th of April, that checks. We'll clear out the scratch pad, we've got a line IRS. And we'll come now to the init page. So for the flight number, interestingly, a little bit strange I find, you can't directly enter any data here via the keyboard. You seem to be able to do that on the OIS. You have to instead press the left control. Seems to work fine, but just a little bit more clunky. So for the flight number, once again, we are Speedbird 350 Kilo. We'll hit enter. As mentioned, tracking from Toulouse, Lima Foxtrot, Bravo Oscar, up towards London Heathrow, Echo Golf, Lima Lima. Alternate for the flight today is Gatwick, Echo Golf, Kilo Kilo. Cruise flight level initially, flight level 340. For the cruise temperature and tropical pause, we'll leave those as default values. For the cost index, interestingly, an unusually high value here from Simbrief, 157. We'll leave the winds. For the departure, expecting runway 32 left. And we're expecting the Laku 7 Bravo departure. Interestingly, 7 Bravo here in Simbrief, 6 Bravo on the jet. put that in the temporary flight plan. For the arrival later on, expecting 9 left into Heathrow. But that's going to be the ILS 09 left. For the star, it'll be the Roxog 1 Hotel. In reality, the cursor actually jumps to the next appropriate field. That isn't the case here in the sim, probably for user convenience. We'll be coming in via Ockham, so we can set all of that. From Laku, we'll come on to Airways. We're tracking direct to waypoint Chala. Charlie Hotel Alpha Lima Alpha. We'll then be direct to the Charlie November Alpha VOR. And then direct to waypoint Manak, Mike Alpha November Alpha Kilo. We'll then be picking up an airway, so Upper Yankee 110. That's out towards waypoint Rev 2, Romeo Echo Victor Tango Uniform. It will then be the Upper Papa 87 airway. And lastly, tracking direct towards Roxog. Romeo Oscar X-ray Oscar Golf. And that'll bring us in for the Roxog arrival. So we can set all of that. We'll just briefly run through the flight plan. So Laku, Chala, Charlie November Alpha, Manak, Upper Yankee 110, Upper Papa 87. In towards Roxog, we can clear out the discontinuity. Just double checking that. That brings us in for the Roxog 1 Hotel. And then in for the ILS 09 left. That's it then in terms of the flight plan. Back onto the init page. The nav aids, we'll leave those auto tuning. For the fuel and load, we have a 058 as mentioned of 219.4 tons. 219.4. 058 CFG is 31.9. And the block fuel again is 23.7 tons. Passenger number today, of course, is 0, at least hypothetically. Taxi fuel, we'll call it 0.5 tons. And for the min fuel at destination, Gatwick again, the alternate, we do need 5.2 tons for Gatwick. We have 5.2 tons. That's giving us 8.4 extra tons over and above what we need at the moment. We are going to be carrying out some flight tests over the channel later on. We'll clear out the scratch pad, check min destination EFOB. We do now have nav primary, and we can hit return. For the takeoff performance, we can now enter our speed. So once again, we're looking at a V1 of 153, a VR of 156, and a V2 of 161. As mentioned, it's going to be a flex takeoff, 58 degrees. Doesn't seem to be a derate option here in the aircraft, which I believe was the same as well with the iniBuilds A330. I believe that probably is a company option. In terms of the flaps, once again, config 1+F for the THS. Once more, we're looking at a setting there of 32%. Packs on, anti-ice off. Thrust reduction and acceleration, we said, was 1988. We'll leave that at 2000, close enough. Transition altitude 5,000 feet. We'll check that off the chart in just a moment. Once again, we can clear out the scratch pad. For the climb thrust setting there, we've got auto derate. So for the flap retraction briefing, it's going to be a config 1 departure. As you can see there, no speed restrictions below green dot. We do have an auto derate, so out of SRS. Once we're above the acceleration altitude of 2,000 feet and through S-speed towards green dot, we'll go flaps 0. That's about it for now. We'll come onto the checklist menu, run through the cockpit preparation checklist. The gear pins and covers have been removed. The fuel quantity, as you can see just above there, we've got 23.7 tons of fuel on board the jet. We've already checked that's balanced. RF again, QNH of 1015. And that is the cockpit preparation checklist complete. The aircraft does have integrated Navigraph functionality. We'll take a look at that later on during the arrival. For now, we'll just brief off the paper chart. So once again, it's going to be Toulouse, runway 32 left, the Laku 6 Bravo or 7 Bravo, depending on which chart versus the aircraft we're looking at here. With the plate there, it's 10-3 Delta, it's an RNAV SID, we do not have GPS primary. Aerodrome elevation 499 feet, transition altitude is 5,000 feet. It's an RNAV 1 departure. Quite a straightforward SID for us, tracking runway heading initially 322 out towards Bravo Oscar 320. Slight right turn, above 5,000 feet at Bravo Oscar 322, and then making a left turn out towards the northwest towards Laku. Again, initial climb 7,000 feet, or flight level 70. In terms of the terrain, the MSA 2,900 feet, highest there noted on the chart is 12,000 feet. Otherwise, lovely day here for us as you've seen. A little bit of light cloud around. 6 knots of wind across the runway, temperature of 11 degrees, QNH 1015. In terms of the taxi, very straightforward for us. We are right next to the threshold here of runway 32 left. No need for a pushback either as well here today. We are going to need 5 minutes here for the engine warm-up after start, so we'll most likely stay on the bay, we'll run through the flight control check, the departure brief, run the taxi checklist, and then we can make our way out towards the runway. Okay, so we have now completed the last of our cockpit preparations. As you can see, we have the APU up and running, APU bleeders selected on. Ground power has been disconnected from the jet. We've armed up the slides and closed up the cockpit door. We are clear for the start, so we'll take the beacon light on. Again, no need for the push here on stand. We're going to be taxiing straight ahead. And we'll come down to the surveillance page, we'll go through to default settings. I do find that with the MFD, it can be a little bit tricky to actuate sometimes. For example, here I am clicking on my mouse, and we've got confirm. So for the checklist page, the before start checklist, the park brake is set. The takeoff speeds and thrust will just come through to the first officer side. So we've got a V1 153, VR of 156, V2 of 161, and a flex of 58 degrees. The slides have been armed, and the nose wheel steering disconnect memo not required here today. Again, no pushback required off the stand. There's the before start checklist complete. Once again, clicking there on the checklist complete button, not immediate in terms of its action. Anyway, we are now cleared for the start, so for the start selector we'll go through to ignition starts. We'll start the number 1 here on the bay, and we'll go external for that so that you can hear the Trent XWB as it runs up. And then we'll come back to the flight deck here for engine 2 start. The FADECs are now powered, and engine 1 start. Okay, so we do have a good start now on engine 1. We'll start engine 2. As usual, just monitoring the parameters here as it runs up. So we've got N2 and N3 rotation. All pressure coming up. There's N1 rotation. And we do have fuel flow. EGT coming up. And in a minute you'll hear really nice sounds again as that Trent XWB spools up and that buzzsaw noise kicks in. Okay, so just waiting on the engine to stabilise. We should see an avail indication, which we have. In terms of the parameters, we've got 20% on the M1s, 500 degrees there on the EGTs, 800 kilograms per hour there on each engine in terms of the fuel burn, so the parameters certainly look pretty decent. The engine start selector can go back through to normal. We'll start the chrono for the engine warm-up. Again, we need 5 minutes. Once more, we're going to time that out probably here on the bay as we run through the taxi prep. So chrono running, we'll take the APU off. We can reset the rudder trim, arm up the spoilers for the flaps once again coming through to 1+F. And for the doors page, again just confirming we do have the slides armed. Nothing for us there in terms of any status messages or dispatch messages. They've got config 1+F for the after start checks. Find if you come down close to the MFD, the acknowledgement of any click input is a little bit better. So for the anti-ice, 10 degrees outside but no visible moisture, not required, the anti-ice is off. Light controls a little bit out of sequence here versus my operator, so we'll do that in just a moment's time. And ground clearance has been received. Again, just struggling to get that click spot. The after start checklist is complete. So once more then, in terms of the taxi on the NF here, you can see we're on the southwesterly apron. Again, a very short taxi for us. We're just going to taxi straight ahead onto Sierra 20. It'll then be a right-hand turn down towards holding point 02 for a full-length departure off runway 32 left. Essentially here just making the right turn out towards the runway. I'll clip for taxi, so nose light can go through to taxi. And again, we'll just carry out the taxi prep here on the bay ahead of the taxi itself. So for the flight control check, we have not quite indicating full up there on the elevator. Okay, there's full up. Pull down, and neutral, pull left, pull right, and neutral, and on the rudder, pull left, pull right, and neutral. In terms of the departure brief, once again, it is runway 32 left, the Lacal 6 Bravo departure. Straight out to Bravo Oscar 320. And a right turn out towards Bravo Oscar 322, we need to be above 5,000. You can see there at the moment we are struggling to make that constraint. We can always keep the speed back if we need to get above 5, we'll see how we go. Ultimately levelling at 7,000, on the PFD we have Climb Blue 7,000, 1 FD2. In terms of the configuration, we'll take the auto brake, terrain on the first officer side, weather here on my side, and we'll carry out a takeoff config test. As you can see there, the test is good. Carry out the taxi checklist. Again, just a little bit fiddly here in terms of the click spots. So for the taxi checks, flaps setting, we have config 1. Checking here on the first officer side. Config 1+F, checked 3 times. And for the radar, that is selected on. That is the taxi checklist complete. We'll just come back onto the surveillance page. Okay, we should see weather radar up here on the EWD. It is selected on. So again for the taxi, just straight out and then right hand turn down to the holding point. The park brake can come off. Taxi light is selected on. We're all clear here on the right. And all clear here on the left. The aircraft is just inching forward here under its own idle thrust, which is really nice to see. And certainly I would say pretty appropriate behaviour at these sorts of weights. We'll just feed in a little bit more thrust here, just to help us get around the corner. And pick up the pace a little bit here as well for the taxi. And as it is a very short taxi segment here, we've got another minute to kill for the 5-minute engine warm-up. we might as well just briefly run through the aircraft in terms of its ground handling characteristics. Overall, I have to say the jet feels really good, very representative in terms of how it handles here on the ground. Turn rates feel good versus my inputs. That's really nice to see.
Running 9497, descend 5,000 feet, 1016, clear the ILS 27 right.
Good 1016, descend now 5,000, clear the ILS 27 right, running 9497.
Establish ILS 27 right, running 10. Tips and look for traffic.
Okay, so we are now lined up here on runway 32 left. We've completed the lineup checklist. The landing lights are on, nose light set through to takeoff. Hot brake is off. We'll come through to 25% initially here on the thrust. And takeoff. So we have Manflex 58, SRS runway, auto thrust blue. Thrust is set. Again, the aircraft feels pretty reasonable in terms of ground handling. Up through 80 knots, easing back on the forward pressure on the stick. There's 100 knots. They're just very light inputs needed here on the rudder to keep the aircraft straight. That is pretty true to life, though not much of a crosswind here today. Yeah, let's rotate. The aircraft actually just getting a little bit light there on the nose ahead of my rotation. Back on the stick, looking to pitch up. 12.5 degrees nose up initially. There's a little bit of a dead zone there as well in terms of the pitch. Okay, we do a positive climb. Gear up. We've got nav there on the FMA. So again, pitching to maintain around 12.5 degrees nose up. The flight director inputs seem to be pretty reasonable at the moment, as does the aircraft performance. Once we come up through 1,500 feet, we'll come through the acceleration heights. There's climb and lever climb. The jet is accelerating, so we'll just start to ease back on the thrust. The aircraft feeling a little bit lightweight there. Thrusty climb auto thrust. Seemingly getting pushed around in what are very light winds, only around 5 knots. Up through S speed. Speed is checked, we'll go flaps 0. The jet feels okay in pitch, a little bit strange though in roll. You can probably see it's a little bit wallowy in roll. So we'll just continue to manually fly here till we're establishing bound towards Bravo Delta 322. Looks like we're okay now in terms of that altitude constraint. You can see there we are going to make flight level 58. So as I say, the aircraft actually quite odd in terms of its handling characteristics. Not very direct on the controls. The real world 350 is fairly direct on the controls. And again, just seems to be a little bit wallowy in roll, almost a little bit delayed on the inputs. It's quite easy to induce an oscillation. They're starting the right-hand turn out towards Bravo Oscar 322. Again, good for the constraint, so no need to select the speeds. Yeah, that's coming up through 5,000 foot. Again, no cabin crew on board the jet today. Nicely established on the flight directors. We'll take the autopilots up through the transition altitude. We've got 1015 there on both primary altimeters. Same there as well on the standby. Flaps are retracted, so nose light can come off. And we can disarm the spoilers. Let's speed out star. Just monitor the automation here as the aircraft levels off. So far no major complaints in terms of the automation. You can see we're tracking quite nicely. And the jet is going to do a very decent job here of levelling off at flight level 70. I do have some queries about the automation, which we'll probably cover off later on. So we'll just let the aircraft level off at 70. We'll then carry out a further climb. We've got out star. And out. As you can see there, the aircraft doing a nice job. The thrust rolling off to maintain 250 knots. So we'll continue the climb out towards flight level 340. Push for managed. And we have thrust declimb, climb, out cruise blue, flight level 340. Again, we'll just come out on the range, so 80 miles now on the nav display. We can take the airports on here as well. What I am actually going to do here is, you can see that RecMax is flight level 402. So we'll continue the climb here up to flight level 400. A bit of a force of habit there. This is flight level 400. We're going to put ourselves right up at RecMax. In the real world, the 350 doesn't perform particularly nicely up near RecMax. Rather lacking in thrust, so we'll see how the aircraft behaves there, whether or not it's true to life. So we've got out cruise blue, flight level 400. On the flight plan page, about 500 miles now to run towards Heathrow. Showing an arrival at the moment with 14.5 tons. In terms of our landing weight here at the moment, showing a landing weight of 233.9. SimBrief gives us a max landing weight of 233 tons. We are going to carry out some air work over the channel though, so we'll easily burn down through that extra ton and we'll be well below the max landing weight before we arrive into Heathrow. Again, you really do have to get quite close into the MFDs before it will register mouse clicks, at least that's what I'm finding here on my PC. Okay, up through 10, the aircraft now accelerating up towards 320 knots. That seems pretty reasonable for a nice high cost index, and transitioning over to Mach 0.84, which again seems pretty good. So up through 10, we'll take the landing lights off. We'll leave the signs on again, nobody down the back here today. That is about it then in terms of the departure. Once again, the aircraft felt pretty decent there during the takeoff, a little bit light on the nose wheel during rotation. Rotation initially felt good, but there was a bit of a dead band, as I mentioned. Again, in pitch, the aircraft is okay. In roll, I do think the aircraft feels pretty strange, and we'll talk more about that later on, of course. We'll get more of a feel as well for the handling during the approach into London Heathrow. In terms of our routing then, continuing to track out towards the northwest for the time being. We'll essentially head up the western coast of France. We'll be crossing over the Channel Islands, out over the English Channel, and then crossing the southern coastline of the UK over the Isle of Wight. In terms of the flight itself, once we're established here in the cruise, we'll take a closer look at the OIS, its various menus and functionalities. Again, later on, once we're out over the English Channel, we'll be carrying out some air work, so we'll test out the aircraft's flight control laws, protections, and as well, again, get more of a feel for the A350's handling. Once we've completed that, we can rejoin the arrival and come onto the star for the approach into London Heathrow.
C'est Tower 10925, Alpha Thunder 59, bonne journée.
Merci, Air France 1735, la tour, 119.25, bon dimanche.
1925, Air France 1735, bon dimanche aussi.
Candy 45 Alpha, speed 180.
Speed 180, scanner 45.
Pour 943, descendez 5 minutes et 1016, je vous rappelle dans un court instant pour le virage.
Okay, so we have now very nearly reached our top climb. 500 foot to go here before we reach flight level 400. Just coming out over the western coastline of France. Just a couple of things I wanted to demonstrate here up at cruise flight level before we run through the OIS. So first things first, at the moment, as you can see, VLS off the scale, or just coming in now. That does seem to creep up rather rapidly as you hit top of climb, which is a little bit unrealistic. You can see there we are getting a pretty low rate of climb now up at cruise altitude. That is pretty true to life of the real world A350. So once we hit out cruise, we're going to carry out a speed test. The 350 is fairly underpowered at cruise altitude. The wings will definitely take you to places that the engines don't really want to go. So we'll demonstrate that in just a moment's time. And again, just keep an eye on VLS there. As we hit cruise altitude, you can see rapidly coming up towards green dot, which is again not true to life. So we have Mach out cruise star, flight level 400. We're coming to selected speeds. Bring that back towards Mach 0.75. And you can see there the speed is reducing. Once we come below green dot, the drag's going to start increasing here as well. And once more, this is a situation that is fairly tricky to recover from in the A350 at high cruise altitudes. Certainly up near rec max. Not all that much excess thrust available. So you can see there the auto thrust rolling off, the speed just coming below green dot. Thrust should come in again to maintain VLS, on top of the amber band there, which looks as though the aircraft is doing, so that is correct behaviour. So again, thrust coming up, just maintaining VLS at the moment. We'll come back into managed speed. It's going to take quite some time for that speed to creep back up, so rather than watching that like a hawk, we'll just talk about the OIS here as we go. You can keep half an eye there on the PFD and the speed scale. So we've already touched on some of the OIS functions. We'll run through all of them now in just a little bit of detail. So firstly onto the Flight Ops menu for the Flight Ops status page. We've already taken a look at that on the ground in Toulouse. Same as well for the load sheet, essentially the load function of the aircraft. Very straightforward, but works very well. Just load up a 0 fuel weight, and the aircraft will automatically load the various aircraft sections. As well, you just put in a fuel load, and the aircraft will automatically load up the wing tanks first, followed by the centre tank. The terminal charts, again, we've already taken a look at those out of Toulouse. We may as well just pre-select London Heathrow while we're here. Of course, here the OIS making use of Navigraph integration, which it's always worth noting does not come as standard with the aircraft. And we may as well pre-select our charts here as well. So it'll be the Warthog 1 Hotel. We'll pin that chart. It's going to take us on to the Ockham transition. So we can pin that here as well. And for the approach, as discussed, expecting the RLS for 09 left, we'll pin that. And we can brief up the charts later on. You can see the speed just coming up now through green dot. So again, very slow in terms of acceleration. En route chart we've just seen again courtesy of Navigraph, and there are multiple charting options available. Currently we're using IFR high day. You can see just tracking down the western coast of France. No documentation included on the OIS. It would have been nice to see, for example, at least a QRH, perhaps as well a paper checklist. Always a bit of a shame with these quote-unquote study level add-ons, although personally I wouldn't class the 350 as a study level add-on. But there's no real FCOM included with the product. You get a 120-something page manual, which, whilst reasonably detailed, is actually far less than you would actually need to properly fly the 350 and make use of all of the functions available on the jet. The manual is okay, it does outline the broad aspects of what you need here to fly the aircraft. The takeoff performance, again, we saw that out of Toulouse. Landing performance we'll carry out later on ahead of the arrival into London. The AOC function is essentially our ACARS messaging. I believe that ties in with Hoppy, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. I haven't got that set up personally. The ground page, as you might imagine, allows us to install and remove various ground equipment, so for example chocks, GPU and air start carts. As well you can connect jetways, luggage trucks, catering. You can operate the aircraft doors, arm the slides, and as well fit stairs at various doors on the jet. You can see now we have just regained our managed speed. The maintenance tab, again, we had a brief look at that. Nothing too flash here. Basic maintenance functions on the aircraft. So functions regarding engines, don't seem to be able to click those in flight. Similarly, we can enact maintenance on the batteries. We've got the battery status, hydraulic and oil quantities, APU oil quantity. We can replace the brakes and the tyres. Again, nothing groundbreaking here, but nice functionality to have here without a doubt. Situations is a really nice page, not something I've seen before at least in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can actually set up various scenarios, so for example depressurization, bird strike, dual engine failure, and then you can run the scenario as per the setup by iniBuilds. Again, I think a really nice option overall. Auto save I have turned off. It's not clear in the manual whether or not that pertains to the OIS specifically, or whether or not that's to the aircraft state in general. As best I can tell, I think it relates only to the OIS. I'll explain why in just a moment. And lastly, panel states, as you might expect, we have cold and dark, on-ground power, on the APU, and ready for takeoff. Lastly, in terms of options, I won't run through everything here just to keep the video length down, but you can pause each page as you wish. So we have aircraft options, OIS settings, which again has the auto save feature, so again I believe that pertains only to the OIS. Equipment settings for the jets, both internally and externally. Throttle calibration, which seems to work quite nicely. Sound and cabin options. Call out options for the rad out. Volume control for the various aircraft sounds. Third-party integration, so again we have SimBrief integration, I haven't got that set up, Say Intentions integration, and Hoppy integration. As well we do have Navigraph integration, which again I am using. And lastly as well we have simulation options, probably the most relevant and interesting one for many of you there. We do have the ability to enact time compression up to 4x within the sim. So that's just a very brief overview of the OIS. Again, if you want to look at any particular page in detail, you can pause the video at the relevant point. In the meantime, continuing here in the cruise, flight level 400, we'll be making another right turn shortly to track north up the coast. Once more, ahead of our arrival, we'll first run through the aircraft setup and the briefing, plan to get ourselves down to around flight level 100 out over the channel. And again, we'll just run through a demonstration of some of the basic flight control laws and protections of the Airbus A350.
This 61 Delta, descend 5,000 feet, 1016, cleared at approach 27 right. Set 5,000 feet, walk 016, cleared at approach 27 right, this is 1 Delta. Accent 1059, descend flight level 70. Descent 70, accent 1059.
Okay, so we are just coming through our ETP now for Toulouse and London. As you can see, we've got about another 15 minutes here ahead of top of descent. However, we'll get the aircraft set up, we'll brief the arrival, and we'll get the jet descending a little bit early here as well. We're aiming to be flight level 100 overhead the channel. So first things first, we'll come back to the landing performance page. Again, we'll just enter the relevant data here for London Heathrow. So the wind 080 at 6 knots, temperature of 6 degrees, and a QNH of 1028. Dry runway conditions. Landing weight, we'll just put max landing weight 233 tons. Config full, no need for a speed increment. Manual landing, manual braking, we'll actually use BTV, and no credit here for the reversers. The airport then, again, Echo Golf Lima Lima. And for the runway selection, for some reason that comes up in the top left hand side of the screen. But again, 09 left, we'll hit compute. So we have a landing distance available, 3596 metres. Factored landing distance is 2110 metres, leaving us a margin of just shy of 1500 metres. The approach of 156, pretty high, again up at max landing weight. And we'll just confirm that here in the box. That's 155. So we're good in terms of the landing performance. Just a very brief run through of the arrival, looking at our pin charts then. So again, it's going to be the Roxog 1 hotel arrival, that is plate 10-2 Juliet, it's an RNAV star. Relevant details here for us, RNAV 1, transition level by air traffic, we'll set that at 60 as per the box. 250 knots below 10, Ockham is the clearance limit in terms of the arrival itself. Initial altitude restriction here, flight level 130 at Hazel. That's not going to be relevant for us here today. Again, we're going to carry out our manoeuvring out over the channel at flight level 100. Thereafter, tracking in towards Ockham, we need to be flight level 70, max 220 knots at Ockham. That brings us on to the transition, which is plate 10-2 Tango. From Ockham, tracking out towards the west. We've got above 6,000 at 12 miles from the Ockham station. above 3,500 foot, D35 from Golf Whiskey Charlie. We need to be 3,000 foot, 10 miles out on the RLS and 2,500 foot at 7.5 DME. That then brings us on to the RLS for 09 left, plate 11-1. We'll check everything later on, but the frequency for that 110.3. Identify India Alpha Alpha. On approach course 089, we have a profile check 2,500 foot at 7.5 miles. We're going down to the Cat 1 MDF 279, and again the aerodrome elevation 83 feet. With this approach, it's climbing straight ahead when passing 1,600 foot or 0 on the RLS DME, whichever's later. Climbing left turn up to 3,000. Bearing is nil significant, as you can see the highest sector MSA 2,200 feet. Weather we've already discussed, a very nice day in London overall, a little bit of cloud around, temperature of 6 degrees and pretty light winds. In terms of the landing, we'll get that set up here for the BTV. We might just get a few stutters here as we come onto the ANF. I suppose inadvertently though it is worth demonstrating that. You can see just losing a few frames here as the ANF loads up. So London Heathrow, again, landing on 09 left. You can see our dry landing distance there. We could come off at Alpha 8. However, in preference here, we'll come off at the first high speed available. Don't seem to be able to drag that. We'll just come onto the ND. I do find the aircraft can be a little bit tricky at times in terms of actuating it. As you can see here, really not very user-friendly in terms of some of the click actions of the jet. I don't think that's just my hardware setup. Most of the switching seems to work just fine. It is just the ND and the MFD selections. Just trying to drag the map across at the moment. In reality, that's just a question of clicking and dragging with the rollerball on the KCCU. If we want the first high speed, that is Alpha 5. So we've got there eventually. We'll set the BTV exit. And arm up the BTV. We've got BTV blue. Just select MFD again for the cursor control later on. So BTV is selected, Alpha 5, first high speed, and distance is sufficient. Again, we'll use BTV and idle reverse for the landing. In terms of the setup here in the box, for the descent, I've just pre-selected 300 knots. For the approach, the wind again 080 at 3 knots currently. Yeah, and the aircraft is a little bit of a pain when it comes to selections. Temperature, again 6 degrees. And the QNH, as briefed, 1028. Barrier minima, again as briefed, will be 279. That is set. That's just about it in terms of the setup and the brief. For now, we'll just continue in the cruise. Still well shy here of our top descent. We've got a box popped up here now on the ND. We don't want that, obviously. Just getting rid of that. And back to the MFD once again. It's about 80 miles now to run till top descent. Again, we want to get the jet coming down early. Aiming to be flight level 100 out over the channel. This flight level 100 selected will pull for an open descent. Back onto the perf page. Interestingly, I did actually pre-select 300 knots here for the descent. 325 knots was a little bit more sporty than I was hoping for. With that pre-selected, the aircraft should command that during the descent, but instead here it seems to have defaulted back towards the original managed speed, which is a little bit strange. So again, for now, just continuing the descent. We've got about 30,000 foot to lose here. Need around 90 miles. That should have us level up waypoint Borlo or thereabouts, which is spot on. Borlo's out over the channel. That should work nicely for us. Once we're down at our planned level and out over the water, again, we'll just carry out some basic air work and put the aircraft through its paces.
Good afternoon, it's the Baby 6 November with you, maintaining flight level 360 routing towards the left.
baby 60 November, London Control, good afternoon. Fly heading 320 degrees, vectors towards Biggin and Hemel, East Midlands, 1 kilo late arrival.
Left up to heading at 320, Big and Hemel, and stern arrival East Midlands, baby 60 November.
Okay, so we are now just approaching waypoint Borlo, as you can see, and that does put us out nicely over the English Channel. So again, we'll just fly a few manoeuvres here manually, just to get a feel for the aircraft's handling and protections. Disconnect the autopilot. Take out the flight directors. So first thing we're going to test simply is the angle of bank protections. Under normal circumstances here, we should just be able to roll the aircraft through to 67 degrees on the angle of bank. Overall, the aircraft doesn't feel too bad here in terms of roll rates and response to the controls. There's 67 degrees. If we release the stick, we should return back towards 33 degrees here on the angle of bank. And you can see their speed is picking up, so we'll just kill the thrust. Start pitching the nose up. There's our overspeed warning. And we should be able to pull back on the stick all the way through to 30 degrees nose up. Which we now have. Speed of course rolling off pretty rapidly. We should see the jet decelerate back towards V Alpha Max with the stick held fully back. Still got full back stick here at the moment. Down through green dots. Again, idle thrust here at the moment. There's V Alpha Prop, V Alpha Max, there's Alpha Floor. You can see their toga thrust kicking in. And still maintaining full back stick. We should maintain V Alpha Max. If we release, we'll come back towards V Alpha Prot. So again, overall the jet actually behaving quite nicely. If we come fully back on the stick again, the best we should be able to achieve now is 45 degrees on the angle of bank. We'll come hard over again, left on the stick. And you can see there we're topping out at 45 degrees. So overall, I certainly have my issues with the iniBuilds A350. It's not perfect yet in its current state, but the protections and the handling seem to be reasonable. I do find that handling during the approach is not particularly stellar at the moment. We'll talk more about that, of course, during the approach itself. Just continue the turn here back towards Roxog. Interestingly, the thrust actually falling off momentarily here. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Maybe I spoke a little bit too soon regarding the protections. Anyway, we'll continue the descent, let the speed build up again. Heading back down towards flight level 100. Start feeding in a little bit of thrust again here as well. So we'll take out the auto thrust, just manual thrust for the time being. We can take the flight director here again. We'll center up the heading bug. Not registering on the ND there, at least not that I could see at the rate we were selecting.
0 degrees. Turn by heading 330, stop to 229.
Okay, it's flight level 100. Interesting that we're not seeing the heading bug here on the PFD. About 2.5 degrees nose up. Should get the aircraft level. I don't know why we're not seeing the heading bug. We'll press for out. In fact, we'll pull for an open climb. And we'll take autopilot 1 once again. Just slow ourselves back round onto a heading of about 040. And we can take the auto thrust here again as well. Back into the climb detent. So we've got thrust declimb, open climb, out blue, flight level 100, speed's good. We'll attempt to direct to. We'll go direct to Amtod. There's Amtod. Again, taking a few clicks there to get it to hit. We can insert the direct to. And we have speed out star nav, direct to waypoint Amtod. Nicely maintaining speed now. Showing about 120 miles to run. Again, of course, we are low at the moment due to that restriction at Hazel. We'll see if we can remove that. So we'll click on Hazel, we'll go constraints. And we'll go out. We'll delete the flight level 130.
7031, thank you, direct to Leadville. Direct to 7031.
So flight level 100, we need about 40 miles here for the descent. We've got about 120, so we've got over 80 miles here that we're going to maintain in the level segment for the time being. Current gross weight 235 tons. We come onto the performance page again. We're showing a landing now at 230.1, so well below max landing weights. But now then we'll continue tracking inbound via the Roxog 1 hotel. You can see the Isle of Wight there actually just off the nose. Again transitioning in via Ockham and expecting the ILS runway 09 left.
London, good afternoon, Britannia 601 Bravo, level 350 bar.
Britannia 601 Bravo, London Control, good afternoon. Continuing your present heading until advised after the vectors, Timber 2 Bravo, Ravel, Gatwick.
Maintain heading until advised, Britannia 601 Bravo, and then Timber 2 Bravo. 205, Shell 5.
Okay, so we're just approaching waypoint Hazel now, inbound for London. So once we come around the corner, we can activate the approach phase. We'll start slowing up on base, again tracking for the ILS 09 left. We'll set 2,500 feet as per the ILS intercept. And 2,500 blue. We'll come back onto terrain on the first officer side. So overall the aircraft is a little bit haphazard sometimes in terms of its logic, but everything does seem to work fairly well. At least we've managed to get the aircraft from A to B with no major upsets along the way. Obviously in terms of navigational tracking, the jet's been pretty good. In terms of our next restriction then, we have Alt Magenta flight level 60. And again, we're still showing low currently, so giving us 1,000 foot per minute rate of descent, which is correct. Happy to maintain 250 knots for the time being, 30 miles to run. We'll start slowing up around 20. We've now also got the correct data here up here on the PFD and the ND, so we've got the Barrow minima there of 279. Landing 09 left, dry 6 for the auto brake, vacating on the right at Alpha 5. In actuality that should have come up 250 miles an hour, I believe it is, before the airfield. Again, we didn't have that due to the fact we were still in the climb phase just a moment ago. And we are now picking up the ILS. We've got India Alpha Alpha, that's checked against the charts. That does look to be in the correct sense. We've got the Loke there out to the left, still showing high on the glide at the moment. 8,000 feet direct to the field, so about 24 miles, that is correct. Obviously we've got plenty of track miles left to lose this altitude, 8,000 feet, 26 miles. We can activate the approach phase. Again, if we can get that click spot. So the approach phase is activated, we've got ILS 09 left. Speed should now roll back towards green dot, does look like it's reducing. Just coming back on path here as well. So we'll initially leave ourselves at green dot. Again, around 20 miles we'll start configuring. We've got 4 miles to run. Probably take flaps 2 here around the corner. It's a fairly acute intercept. Once we've made the turn, we can arm up the ILS. So flight level 60 at Delta 287 Lima. Doesn't look like that's going to be an issue for us. So I think in actuality here we wouldn't see Alt Magenta since we're not going to hit the restriction. There's 7,000. We'll keep an eye on things here. The jet is just about on profile now, so we don't really want to be shallowing off that descent. We should be coming back to chase that VDEV once the speed's reduced. And we'll keep an eye here as well on the glide. So 7,000 feet, we need about 21 miles. We've got 13 plus another 7. Still looking pretty reasonable. We probably need a little bit of drag at this point, so speed is checked. We'll take flaps 1. We'll come into selected speed. We'll hold 185. There's thrust idle.
60 climbing.
And already slowed up here that we're getting both the slats and the flaps in the extension. Again, that's going to give us quite a bit of drag, which is nice.
Requesting flight level 430.
Then hopefully we'll get that descent rate increasing in order to meet the glide.
Flight level 430, Charlie Lima.
We might just take the speed brake momentarily just to help the jet on its way. 12 miles an hour plus the 5 is 17. Probably want to be closer to 5,000 feet at this point. And we'll come over as well now onto the QNH, which we said was 1028. There's 1028. We'll set that as well here on the standby. I think iniBuilds do need to work a little bit on some of the click spots. Again, having quite a bit of difficulty with the aircraft, so 1028 on all three altimeters. We'll run through the approach checks. At the Barra Ref we have a QNH of 1028. Minima we have a Barra of 279. Runway condition we have dry 6 sets for the auto brake. We have BTV. That is the approach checklist complete. Just coming in towards the glide. Keep the descent rate up for the time being. We've got Alt Magenta 3000. We'll come through to flaps 2 again, just taking a little bit more drag, help the jet in the descent. And on a good intercept now, so we can arm up the approach. We've got glide slope Loke, land 3 dual, autopilot 1 and 2. There's Loke Star. We'll hold 180 till around 7 miles. We might avoid actuating the landing checklist here. I think it's going to be rather fiddly to try and do that as we come down the approach. So we're just looking for a landing memo, no blue items. Again, no cabin crew down the back, so not a concern there. Just approaching the glide again, the missed approach altitude will be 3,000 feet. There's glide slope Star. We'll get rid of the speed brake. And there's 3,000 for the missed approach. So speed looking good, visual now with runway 09 left. There's Loke. Approaching 8 miles, we'll take the gear down. Nose light can go through to takeoff. We'll arm up the spoilers.
2,500.
Let's check 2,500. And approaching 7 miles. It's 170. In terms of that landing weight now, you can see 232 tons, so below max landing weight again 233. Speed is checked, we'll go flaps 3. London really like 160 till 4, but I'll go 160 till 5 here. Again, just for the sake of the video. Got Windsor Castle down there on the left. Nice view of that. And overall, I've got to say, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 still not looking half bad. Okay, just approaching 5 miles, we're going managed speed. We've got the Wembley Stadium, they're off in the distance as well out at our 10 o'clock, you might just about be able to make that out. So coming back towards the approach, nice established here on the glide. And on the Loke, the aircraft doing a very decent job of tracking that. Coming through to flaps full. So for the landing checks then, we have on the ECAM memo landing, essentially no blue, again just the cabin item. That is the landing checklist complete.
33050.
Approaching 1,000 feet, we'll just wait here till we're stable, then we'll take the autopilot out. And I'll obviously talk you through the handling here during the approach. Overall, I'm not a big fan of how the aircraft handles on the departure and the arrival. Otherwise, it's overall reasonable. Let's check we are stable. We'll just use the instinctive disconnect push button here. I don't have anything bound to my hardware currently. Getting a few stutters here as well now. It is London, but the aircraft also pretty intensive on the FPS, it does have to be said. There's approach 1. The aircraft wanting to dip the nose, so just correcting for that. Actually, I slightly prefer the handling here in 2020 versus 2024. In 2024, you definitely get a lot of that strange oscillating behaviour that I mentioned earlier on.
500.
Let's check. So as I say, the aircraft actually a little bit better to hand fly here in 2020 than I've experienced in 2024.
300.
Though starting to notice some of that slight control delay, it feels like. Again, it's very easy to get the aircraft oscillating. A little bit low there on the PAPI, same on the glide, correcting for that.
100.
350 really likes to float in real life, so we'll come back off the thrust nice and early.
50. 40.
Back off the thrust levers, into the flare. Yeah, again, the aircraft feels a little bit strange, a little bit reticent on the controls. There's touchdown. Go idle reverse. Zero spoilers, rev green. Decel BTV. Unfortunately, the menu's popped up there again on the nav display. We'll let BTV do its thing. It should continue to decelerate the aircraft, bring us in through to Alpha 5. Just continue the landing roll here, see what the aircraft actually does. Does it get a slow down at the correct exit? Does look like it's going to. So overall, that's quite a nice feature, seems to work pretty well. We'll cancel the reverses, cancel the braking, and we can vacate off on the right. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the iniBuilds A350. As usual, I'll just take the last few minutes of the video here to give you my overall thoughts regarding the product. Starting with the modelling and texturing, I'm not going to labour the point on either of those too heavily. Again, I'm sure you've seen many other A350 videos at this point, and hopefully here as well my own video has demonstrated to you the level of quality when it comes to the external and internal modelling and texturing of the jet. Very briefly, the external modelling and texturing, no faults really there. I think iniBuilds have done a really nice job with the aircraft. Not a criticism per se, but some of the very best add-ons now available within the sim are textured so well that you can almost feel the weight, the texture, the actuation of each individual switch and component throughout the flight deck. With regards to the cockpit of the iniBuilds A350, overall I think the texturing is just slightly more cartoonish, but I really am splitting hairs at this point. One aspect of the internal modelling that did feel slightly off to me was the proportions around the flight deck. It is always a little bit difficult to draw any concrete conclusions, perhaps without using VR. Of course, my seating position and zoom level within the cockpit could be very different from what you would see in the real world. But overall, some of the proportions did seem off. The overhead panel particularly stood out to me when I first looked around the cockpit. Worth noting as well with regards to the modelling, you're only going to get the full aircraft with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. With 2020 you get a reduced internal model with regards to the cabin, and on the console as well you aren't going to be getting a fully feature complete jet. With regards to flight modelling, again I do have some real world time on the Airbus A350, and the long and short of it, for me at the moment, I do find the flight modelling of the iniBuilds A350 to be a little bit underwhelming. As we saw during the flight, iniBuilds have done a decent job at recreating the flight control protections of the aircraft, but in terms of recreating the raw handling characteristics, again just talking through the flight itself, in terms of taxiing the jet felt very nice, in terms of the takeoff roll, again rudder response felt pretty reasonable. As I mentioned, the nose wheel did start to feel as though it was going pretty light ahead of the rotation, which is not true to life, at least not in any significant sense. And then during the rotation itself, again it felt to me as though there was some sort of dead zone, dead band during the rotation manoeuvre. Once airborne, the aircraft felt reasonable in pitch, but again quite strange in terms of its roll behaviour, particularly I found in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. As I mentioned during the flight, the roll response almost feels delayed versus your inputs. Very easy, as I mentioned, to end up with oscillation and roll, particularly on final approach, which once more not true to life of the real world jet. The aircraft felt reasonable during the flare, it is just a case of checking back in the real aircraft, and as I mentioned, the A350 really likes to float during the flare, so you have to generally cut power quite early. Overall, iniBuilds seems to have done a pretty nice job of replicating that. In terms of more aggressive manoeuvring, obviously in the real world I've only practiced that in the sim, and even multi-million pound full fidelity, full motion simulators don't replicate these sorts of manoeuvres entirely accurately, I'm led to believe. But in terms of throwing the aircraft around the sky, the iniBuilds A350 didn't feel a million miles away from the sim. With regards to the aircraft hitting the numbers, overall the 350 did seem to be quite representative in terms of the flight modelling. I haven't compared the add-on with any real-world data, but it does seem to behave broadly as you would expect. The takeoff run felt reasonable at that sort of weight and flex temperature, climb rates felt good, it was nice to see the behaviour there at rec max. I haven't had the opportunity to look at fuel burn over a longer sector, but it did seem reasonable for our short hop. And descent calculations, weight calculations, the BTV calculation, again all reasonably close to the mark. For me, it does feel as though the flight model of the A350 needs further work. There aren't any particularly upsetting behaviours with regards to the flight model, so it's perfectly possible to get the aircraft from A to B in a nice and controlled fashion. However, given the price point of the iniBuilds A350, personally I'm expecting high fidelity and high quality with regards to all aspects of the product. Systems modelling at the moment is much the same as the flight modelling. Overall, I would say that iniBuilds have done a decent job of the systems modelling given the complexity of the Airbus A350. And again, if you do just want to take the aircraft from A to B on a typical flight, not throwing any curveballs or failures into the mix, the aircraft performs quite well. At the moment though, you certainly couldn't call the systems modelling study level per se. Particularly upon release, the aircraft did have a multitude of system errors, which once more given the price point is disappointing to see. In fairness, iniBuilds have subsequently been very busy patching up the aircraft, but of course it's generally very nice to see all of these things signed off ahead of release. iniBuilds have quite impressively managed to capture a number of unique systems to the Airbus A350, for example, as we saw, BTV working very nicely. Also, as you've seen with regards to the systems, I did have quite a bit of difficulty actuating various MFD functions, the same as well navigating around the nav display. Generally speaking, whilst technically impressive that iniBuilds have managed to recreate the A350 avionics suite, I did find the user interface with many of the displays to be a little bit clunky, and oftentimes, again, hard to actuate. Similarly, at the moment, quite a few of the aircraft systems are either inaccurate or buggy. For example, the managed speed during my flight was jumping up and down very momentarily, but nevertheless notably. The same as well for various other data outputs on the displays, and for example, VNAV didn't seem to be particularly rock solid. And once more, systems fidelity is such that overall the aircraft does operate like an A350 in the normal sense, but probably the easiest way to sum up systems fidelity of the add-on, every now and again I do actually use my home PC as a training aid, and again aid being the operative word, and I find I am able to get some very decent utility out of, for example, the Phoenix Airbus A320, the FS Labs A320. In its current state, I couldn't see myself using the iniBuilds A350 in the same sense. Aircraft sounds are also a bit of a mixed bag. There are some really nice features to the sound set, but as well some sounds that are somewhat lacking. The startup sounds were nice, particularly internally. Externally they did sound pretty good, although they were lacking in range a little bit throughout the startup sequence. The aircraft also sounds appropriately nice and loud externally, as well in the cruise. Surprisingly, you still don't see that on a number of add-ons available for the sim. The flyby sounds as well were pretty nice, although there was somewhat of a dead zone as the aircraft actually passes the user. That is a pretty typical issue though for most aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator. The overall background ambient sounds did come across as a little simplistic. So for example, the pack sounds, the ventilation sounds, the wind noise over the airframe didn't sound true to life, and again that did just make the jet feel that little bit less immersive. Overall the sound set is above average for the sim, and again it does have some nice aspects to it. But once more, for this sort of price point, there are certainly other add-ons with a more comprehensive and impressive sound set overall. In terms of product extras, overall the add-on does shine in that department. Once more though, it is very important to note that you will be getting a very different feature set depending on which version of the sim you're running. So as stated earlier on, the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 version of the aircraft is the only feature-complete version of the A350. You will have to make concessions if you're hoping to run the aircraft in 2020 or on the console. Overall though, we do get a few nice concessions to external ground equipment, fixtures and fittings. With the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 version of the aircraft, we'll get a fully modelled cabin. The OIS, as we demonstrated during the cruise, certainly has a whole host of features available, very much on a par with your top tier add-ons. And we have all of the usual integrations that you would expect, so the aircraft integrates with Hoppy, SimBrief, Navigraph, as well I believe again for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 users you also have the option to integrate the native sim charts into the OIS. We also get some really nice custom effects included by way of engine vortices, nice wing flex modelling as well. And generally speaking, as I say, the iniBuilds A350 very much on a par with your top tier add-ons when it comes to the extra features included with the product. So far as the documentation included is concerned, once again there is a 124-page manual available on the iniBuilds website. As I mentioned, overall the manual is decent. It does give you a pretty comprehensive breakdown of the aircraft systems and their operation. That being said, the manual does seem to focus on data and systems operation and is quite fragmented in terms of its structure. As I mentioned during the flight itself, it is always nice to see a more comprehensive document suite. Ideally, to get the most out of these sorts of aircraft, you do want something akin to an FCOM, a QRH, but in fairness to iniBuilds, most add-on developers these days don't seem to include those sorts of documents. Lastly, before my final conclusion, touching on FPS. Performance certainly plays a big factor at the moment in terms of the usability of the add-on. Again, since release, iniBuilds have been very busy updating the add-on. I gather there have been a number of performance improvements. But for me at the moment on my machine, as of version 1.06, the aircraft definitely underperforms versus the competition. Interestingly, with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, I was able to maintain 60 FPS, but in terms of actual user experience, it felt much lower than that. Something certainly felt off. And it was actually performance with the aircraft in 2024 that led me to record most of this video with 2020. Ironically, I gather that most users suffering FPS issues with the jet have been suffering them in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, but for me the aircraft actually ran much more smoothly in 2020, and as well I think the Sim's lighting actually made graphically the aircraft look more impressive overall. Obviously your experience will vary depending on which version of the Sim you're running, as well which hardware you're using to run it. But again, certainly worth noting at the moment, the iniBuilds A350 does hammer your system pretty hard. Anyway, that just about covers everything for the video here today. In terms of my final conclusions then, overall my thoughts on the iniBuilds A350, it seems to me, and I think it has been made pretty clear by the multitude of updates that we've seen since release, that the add-on was released too early. That does still show in many areas, many aspects of the product. It's not a bad option necessarily if you are looking for something fairly mid-tier in terms of its current fidelity. Again, an add-on that does a decent job of representing the aircraft on a typical flight from A to B. However, if you do start to scratch underneath the surface, you'll probably notice a number of irregularities and issues. And for me personally, I think I'll more than likely be giving it a few more patches before I jump back into the jet. Anyway, ladies and gents, once again, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And once more, if you would like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron, and links to both of those will be down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for making this content possible. And to all of you, I hope you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.